Okay, I'm here with Andrew Millington.
Hi.
Lovely to meet you. And he's the filmmaker behind Zoras Dream, which is been nominated at Festival Milan. Congratulations, welcome.
Thank you.
If you could, always the same opening question, Andrew, if you could give us the synopsis of the film, please.
Yeah, it's based on an old man who has Alzheimer's, and his granddaughter is struggling to take care of him. He's in the early stages of the disease, and she's realizing he has some secrets in his past, where he's come from. Why is he in Washington, D.C.? And he keeps talking about the Ashley River. Well, there's some secrets to the Ashley River that eventually they have to make a trip to find out. What is it that is, you know,
what's in the
motivation for exactly his traumas, his ability to keep a family together, and that's a huge question. You know, do we tell our families where we've come from because it's so traumatic, it's so heart-wrenching, or do we try and protect them from some of the traumas we've been through?
And of course, I suppose the paradox here is if he doesn't reveal, there's going to be a point in the very near future where he's going to not be able to remember, of course.
Exactly, and so there's that. You know, I think all families deal with this kind of thing. To nurture young children and progeny for the future. Why is it we think we have to protect them from not giving them their true histories and the struggles, which in many cases can help them to go on, but it's not easy. Emotionally, it can be wrenching, and that was certainly how I came to this kind of story, and that is. Yeah,
I mean that was kind of my. I mean, sort of obvious. Especially, I've got a ton of questions. And all joking aside, which I'll ask you about in a minute. I mean, you could have shot this where you live, but there's obviously a reason you chose not to. But if you can tell me how you came across, is there like a personal connection to this?
Absolutely, in two kinds of roots, if you want. One, I'm originally from Barbados, but I was living in Washington, D.C. Up to four years ago. I'd been in D.C. for the USA for about 25 years. As a filmmaker, you are constantly looking for material, and the material really that you feel emotionally driven and impacted is the personal. And I stumbled on a story of an old man on a South Carolina plantation who had come back from Chicago and got a job. And he had said, yeah, my ancestors were here, and I lived in a house that was a hut that was right over there. And that set me thinking, because I had read in history that the island of Barbados, where I'm from, in the 17th century, lots of Barbadian planters actually moved to South Carolina, in the Charleston area.
Right, okay.
And it always bothered me that the history books talked about these rich planters and what they built, but you know, the Africans, which of course they own, came with them. There was no history about it, and I kept looking for it till it sparked the imagination. Yeah, well, this guy clearly was looking for this portal into which, or from which, you know, his whole history was sort of blossomed, and I created then a character based on that, and it's about the imagination now, and trying to figure out where he's been. Where you're told, you know, your family is from a certain area, but you have had to move on for a number of different reasons, social and otherwise. And how is it then that we come at a particular point in time and trying to figure out who we are in this world and our identities and our past and so on. And we have to put the puzzle together. And sometimes the previous generation is not always helpful for a number of different reasons. It's really also looking at official histories is my interest. That
not fake news, then.
Not fake news or fake sources, I call them too. The history is just invisible. It's just not there because it wasn't the interest of a particular historian or group of people to maintain that history. And so it becomes then the legacy of those in the future to have to reach back and find it amidst all kinds of hardship. I mean, they're folk stories. You know, my father used to say this. but I'm not sure. Is he sure?
Is it an urban legend?
Exactly. Yeah. Did he make it up?
Yeah.
You know.
And on that note, of course, the problem you're going to have. Sorry, interrupt, please.
Sure.
But it sort of plays into exactly what you're talking about. If you're when you're making a film of this nature about a subject which could be, it's quite difficult to face. You presumably got to do research or find people that really know about it. And how did that come about?
Well, it's tough because my wife is from Louisiana, and part of the deal was if I get to Louisiana, you know, or anywhere in the South, you know, can we just sort of try and get through South Carolina on our way back, or, you know, but I had to go to Charleston. I had to research the history of Charleston, what happened in Charleston. You know, and it's not an easy history because we're talking about slave markets, we're talking about, you know, people who had to build their lives outside of a huge oppressive system. People who use their imagination, who use their faith to retain a sense of their culture. And so then I began to research the plantations all along South Carolina, finding the Barbadian
was any of that sort
of architecture and what have you.
And was any of that research quite difficult? I mean, I'm sure you have a very good idea of the history. I mean, you come across as someone that you've spoken about, you're very interested in historical events, but even so, when you're going looking through the history, was there anything you came across actually quite upsetting, or, you know, did you not find it necessarily difficult to deal with, but surprising might be a better word?
Well, it's tough. Surprising, I don't know. After a while reading American history, you realize it's built on a lot of resistance, the resilience of people, because there are all these different forces fighting for primacy. So going back to that time, you had slave rebellions, and there are no signposts to them, or there's just one signpost, so you got to go back to the history. I was lucky because I studied history in undergrad, so I had you know, I enjoyed that kind of thing. And you have to make relationships with people, and you realize that people have had a tough time. There are a lot of injustices that they don't want to talk about. All right, you've had a whole history after emancipation of lynching, of arbitrary violence, and what have you, in the face of having built their own communities. Some of it, you know, it's pretty stark. It's difficult stuff. You get a whole history of migration, and you ask yourself, well, why are all these people moving? Well, they're moving for better jobs, yes, but they're push factors too.
Yes.
You know, the very conditions under which people live are very difficult, and they must seek a better life. And I think that's one of the things I found fascinating. Here's a guy, you know, he says, you know, as a young man, I'm going to go to a big city, you know, more opportunity, a better quality of life, and I'm going to make it, and I'm going to come back. You know, he goes back because his roots are there, his family, you know, his heritage is bound up.
And how did you go about mixing all of that history that you had to look into, also with the problem, I guess, of filming a subject, quite a difficult subject matter, in terms of, you know, the guy's frankly losing his mind.
His mind, yeah.
You know, I'm only telling it like it is. So you've got to mix all that you kind of know about, but relearning, and then you're mixing this story into that. I mean, that's quite a complicated process, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a natural fit in terms of subject matter that allows you to layer in a certain kind of way. And characters reach back. Sometimes you don't know why. They keep memories from the past. And I sort of use that to sort of spark character memories, memories that you're not quite sure what the images are, which I think is really the joy of film and working in film, that, you know, it's at the end of the day, it's the images that strike you most. And if you're writing from character conflict, this interaction not just with other humans, but with history itself, propels you in a certain direction. And so it's now to find the right structure, which of course I might as well say it. You're disrupting the very Hollywood dominant, structure that people are accustomed to.
And thank goodness for that. But thank goodness for that, because
hopefully it's new, hopefully it's fresh, hopefully it's a different way of seeing, which I think adds to the whole enjoyment of story, really.
Yeah, and that's a really good way of putting it. And I know there are instances of, I can certainly think of, I won't name, but there are really great films that come out of Hollywood. Well, actually, no, I don't mind mentioning one actually, which I've seen a couple of times. And 12 Years a Slave.
Yeah.
And I've seen it a couple of times, and I don't think I'd watch it again.
Right.
It is a great. I can see why people lauded it the way, and that they're rightly so. But it didn't touch me in the way that I was hoping it would.
Yeah.
But I can't take anything away from Stephen as a brilliant filmmaker.
Exactly.
But as it happens, a completely different subject matter. I actually thought Shame was a better film, and I'd like the narrative more. And I'm not quite sure what it was about that film I didn't particularly warm to, but I suppose it just shows you that filmmaking is a subjective matter in any case.
It is.
Your favourite film might be, I don't know, Blade Runner or whatever, but it won't necessarily be mine. But I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that whatever you think about the people like that who are making these great films, at the end of the day, I still believe that a lot of these filmmakers that are making these films, particularly in the Hollywood system, at the end of the day, they've still got to make money, haven't they?
Yeah.
And I truly believe that the bigger the budget, the less control you're going to have on a film.
Yeah.
Because presumably you've got more and more suits becoming involved in it.
Exactly.
And so I guess the question is, I'd imagine you probably have complete artistic control on this. So you must do, because it's your film.
Exactly.
But I suppose the slippery pole is, say you was handing a big budget, which I'm sure you would love to.
Sure.
But then you've got to sort of balance that with knowing full well that, yeah, I'd love to get this gig, but hang on a minute, where's this? What kind of control? Because ultimately, I mean, you're going to lose some kind of control.
Yeah.
So would you be able to make that kind of film with? I'm sure you can with a lot of dollars, but you would have to compromise. I assume. I suppose it's the question I'm trying to ask. And could you tell it the way you'd really want to tell it?
Yeah.
Does that kind of make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, it's about creativity. It's about still being true to some sort of artistic vision.
Yeah.
And what are you, as you said, is subjective, but I have to live with the story I tell at the end of the day. I'm not. I know I'm not typical. I can make the other kind of film, but there's always this tension between what's innovative or what's true to how you see a story and how a story is unfolding for you, and this dominant structure that people over years, and I mean, I'm not saying it's a negative. It's work for them. Yeah. Of how a story evolves, and unfortunately, I'm hoping that with the proliferation of so many different options, that eventually people begin to see new things.
I agree, totally agree. Yeah.
And experience new cultures and new worlds and
totally.
And I mean, this is where the artist stands at some point. Am I going to go into the given, the tried, the true, the proven, or am I going to try and experiment and take a risk, which I have, to tell it a different way?
And have you always been involved in filmmaking?
Yeah, I've been lucky.
I kind of know the answer because I've read a bit about it, but it's for the benefit of the people that aren't.
Sure. When I came into film really, I was actually at university getting ready to go a PhD. And I just happened to meet a group of friends who, were doing film, and we argued about film, and I took a few film classes, and along the way the PhD got left. And
what was your original? What was the PhD?
It was in mass communications and African history.
Right.
So I was on a completely different. But I recognized there was an artistic desire that I needed to fulfill. I had studied music, I had studied theater and what have you. I was an avid reader. and story. I caught the story bug, and I caught the film bug, and that propelled me then to work, you know, intern, you know, a couple of Warner Brothers series, HBO, and what have you. But the independent films that filmmakers that I work with, especially Haile Gerima, who's an Ethiopian, were very important for me. There was a film called Sankofa. It was shot in Jamaica and Ghana. I had started working as an assistant director, and that sort of opened my eyes to different options, different ways of how you could tell stories and still entertain.
Yeah.
You know, but that we could begin to explore this medium and make a lot more of it. Eventually, I'd go on and start making my own films.
And do you bring the same crew, the same hub crew with you for each film?
Well, no, it never quite worked out that way.
No.
I wish. But it's interesting because most of the people I work with, like I worked on other films, you know, we'd be chatting, and I got this idea for a real film. You want to go to Barbados and shoot a film, you know? And they jump at it because they think of Barbados, oh, sun, sea, you know, exactly.
Which I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is.
I said, okay, I'll get you guys a beach house. Let's just go and let's just do some work. And they get, you know, I don't have the big funding and whatnot, but with the artistic vision and help, you know, bringing people on who can help you achieve the goals, people who are invested in art themselves, it had to be. Some of them have gone on now. You know, one of them is working, big music video, cinematographer. You make these connections. Zora's Dream is actually shot by a guy I met out of LA, Filipino, Paul DeLumen. I think he does a really brilliant job. We connect, and it has to be that kind of artistic connection. I support a lot of what I do. I teach film as well. I taught at Howard University right now.
Oh, wow,
yeah.
right.
I'm in Barbados at the University of the West Indies at Cave Hill, trying to help build an industry there. So that supports me, my wife, who and kids. My wife understands this is the way to go if you're going to do something meaningful.
She's
so
not in filmmaking. Sorry,
no, she's a screenwriter.
Oh, so. So she is then. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a matter of, you know, it's not that I haven't, you know, pitched stuff, you know, for big money and whatnot, but if this is the opportunity, I'm not sitting down at home waiting for the phone to ring.
No.
You know, I've got to do something, otherwise, you know, and it's there. I've been able to, you know, get money to do some documentary and what have you, and that works. But I have had to figure out how, you know, if I'm going to make this work, if I'm going to be committed to making the statement that I think is important, then you've got to figure out how, in fact, you're going to organize your life to achieve that, what you're willing to live with, what you're willing to let go.
You've got to work at all these things, I know.
Yeah, it's tough, and you don't want to, you know, sometimes I'd want somebody else to come in and help write, you know, some of the stuff.
Well, I was talking to a filmmaker in Nice, and she knows, and this is, I suppose, a pointer on how hard you've got to work. She knows a guy that won an Oscar for sound design. I can't remember what film it was.
Yeah.
Only 2 or 3 years, maybe 3 years ago, and or certainly in the last 5 years. And she said, and I said, well, wow, this guy must have worked pouring hours. She said, no, not at all, because the problem that he made himself was he won the Oscar, but then didn't promote himself enough.
Exactly.
And she said, you know, you'd think that when you got it, the work would come flooding in. She said he did to begin with, but you've got to really, really say, this is what I've done, this is what I've done, constantly.
Yeah.
He didn't do that, and he's now struggling for it. It's hard to believe.
It happens, though.
But it happens, yeah. You know.
A lot of folks that I went to school with, for example, the same dreams, you know, a lot of them took off and went off to Hollywood. They did their own thing, and you know, and they look at me now and they say, oh, well, at least you got a couple of films. And I'm saying, but you guys are in the heart, in the beast. You really in the, the struggle and whatnot. We just took different routes. We still try and inspire each other from time to time, but that's the nature of the business. And you've got to develop a sense of self, a very strong sense of who you are and what you're willing to work with and what you're willing to go after.
And what about when you actually, not even necessarily on, on set, probably be a better way to frame this question, when you're there and you've got the crew around you, because let's tell it like it is, at the end of the day it's your project, it's ultimately you're at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah.
So how do you, I mean you come across quite laid back, I don't know if you like to work on set, I've no idea. So but the question is, how do you make sure that A, everyone's doing their job, and B, they're all motivated, and kind of to stay on top of it all?
Yeah.
Because you're the captain of the ship, really,
right.
Aren't you? And how do you do that?
If I were smart, I would have read the big bio of Winston Churchill.
Which, okay.
Because
which one?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many. And that's exactly the reason. You're in the moment, and you've got to figure out how to keep people excited about what you're doing. Both from your cast, your working day to day, your crew. You've got to figure out, okay, what's the next objective that's really going to make them, the film, how things are changing, the moments that you want, and sometimes you've got to say, guys, let's do something interesting, with the lighting. This is what's happening with the character. This is where we want to go to with the scene.
Yeah.
What do you think we can do, really, really interesting? You move it now from self, and you give it to them, and you let them help you live, recreate this whole world, because that's if they're professional, that's what they love. That's what they want to do. They want to see that they can contribute to the creativity and the innovation, and I think once you do that, it's something that they have value and worth
kind of
by the end.
off.
Exactly. Okay. It doesn't always work, because
perhaps you ought to read The Art of War, the Prince.
Exactly. Exactly. I called up my friend the other day, another cinematographer, and I said, take a look at this script. He called me back. He said, wow, great script, but we got to find the money to do it. We can't do it like we used to do it before, Andrew. It's, you give your heart, you give your soul, blood, sweat, tears, all that kind of thing. But at some point in time, it can't be maintained. You've got to now achieve a balance, and he's right. We can't all be kamikaze, because we've got to live to tell the next story. And
what is the next story? I mean, unless you've got loads on the back burner, but have you got something that's sort of, if you can talk about this, kind of brewing?
Yeah, I can. I have a screenplay. It's called John Crow Paradise. Okay. It's set in the Caribbean. And
how convenient.
And my moving back experience has been it's been difficult. It's been different, because all my childhood memories, they don't necessarily fit now into what Barbados is now 25, 30 years ago. So I have a story about a woman who accidentally comes, have a good time. She's had a past there, and she actually gets involved with a guy. She comes with a guy, and she can't leave because he dies under suspicious circumstances.
Right.
So then she decides, well, I've got to figure out my past. And really, what the mind does is, when you experience things that are difficult in your past, you block it out. So then there's a process that you've got to figure out now, how to open it up and come face to face with, that history. I guess you're seeing a pattern here, right?
Well, I kind of am, actually, because it sounds almost like a parallel to the one you're doing.
Yeah, except this one now is we're moving from the very beginning. And she finds it through working with another artist. And what they managed to do is pull apart this whole thing of the plantation. I mean, the plantation is the key geographical and social construction in the Caribbean. And it looks at how we've evolved from that time, and how now she has had to make peace with this plantation. which you know she was a part of, but yet having left, like so many, you know, people from the Caribbean, still have to come back and deal with the past, and it's the kind of story. It's not quite East meets West, but it's about local communities struggling to now become what we call globally competitive. How do you pull, you know?
We're all part of that, aren't we?
Exactly. How do you pull them now into the real world and say, okay, here now you exist. Now you create what a tourist wants and make your living from it, and give them everything they want. You got to meet global standard of how you create the space around you, and that's not easy, and that also affects who you are as a person. And I'm interested in how we act out these kind of things. So, you know, characters, I think, are really, and humans are really fascinating things to study, because, you know, we see people, they come, they go to the bar, they get drunk. We don't know why. Exactly, right? We don't know sometimes, you know, the story behind, you know, where a person is behaving the way they're behaving. And once you reach behind the veneer, you realize, wow, that could have been me. You know, how close is it sometimes? You know, and I think that sometimes if you achieve that in film, that's the story I'm trying to tell in John Crow Paradise. It's a paradise, but it can also, if you're not careful, chew you up and leave you for the...
Oh, so it could be Dante's Inferno?
Exactly.
Oh, sorry. On that note, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's wonderful.